Hi, my sweet littles. Today is a Friday, April 3rd, 2020. Matilda. We are on page 126. We're part 2 of the chapter Bruce, Bogtrotter, and the Cake. We left off and little Bruce was having to eat this cake yesterday, if you remember clearly. We're going to start with a picture. The boy picked up the knife and was about to cut into the cake when he stopped. He stared at the cake, then he looked up at the trunch bowl, then at the tall, stringy cook with her lemon juice mouth. All the children in the hall were watching tensely, waiting for something to happen. They felt certain it must. The trunch bowl was not a person who would give someone a whole chocolate cake to eat just out of kindness. Many were guessing that it had been filled with pepper or castor oil, that would make you very sick, or some other foul-tasting substance that would make the boy violently sick. It might even be arsenic, and he would be dead in 10 seconds flat. Or perhaps it was a trap cake, and the whole thing would blow up the moment it was cut, taking Bruce Bogtrotter with it. No one in the school put it past the trunch bowl to do any of these things. "I don't want to eat it," the boy said. "Taste it, you little brat," the trunch bowl said. "You're insulting the cook." Very gingerly, the boy began to cut a thin slice of the vast cake. Then he levered the slice out. Then he put down the knife and took the sticky thing in his fingers and started very slowly to eat it. "It's good, isn't it?" the trunch bowl asked. "Very good," the boy said, chewing and swallowing. He finished a slice. "Have another," the trunch bowl said. "That's enough, thank you," the boy murmured. I said have another," the trunch bowl said, and now there was an altogether sharper edge to her voice. "Eat another slice. Do as you're told." "I don't want another slice," the boy said. Suddenly the trunch bowl exploded. "Eat!" she shouted, banging her thigh with the riding crop. "If I tell you to eat, you will eat. You wanted cake, you stole cake, now you've got cake. What's more, you're going to eat it. You do not leave this platform, and nobody leaves this hall until you have eaten the entire cake that is sitting there in front of you. Do I make myself clear, Bogtrotter? Do you get my meaning?" The boy looked at the trunch bowl. Then he looked down at the enormous cake. "Eat, eat, eat," the trunch bowl was yelling. Very slowly, the boy cut himself another slice and began to eat it. Matilda was fascinated. "Do you think he can do it?" she whispered to Lavender. "No," Lavender whispered back. "It's impossible. He'd be sick before he was halfway through." The boy kept eating. When he had finished the second slice, he looked at the trunch bowl, hesitating. "Eat!" she shouted. "Greedy little thieves who like to eat cake must have cake. Eat faster, boy, eat faster. We don't want to be here all day, and don't stop like you're doing now. Next time you stop before it's all finished, you'll go straight into the chokey. And I shall lock the door and throw the key down the well." The boy cut a third slice and started to eat it. He finished this one quicker than the other two, and when he was done, he immediately picked up the knife and cut the next slice. In some peculiar way, he seemed to be getting into his stride. Matilda, watching closely, saw no signs of distress in the boy yet. If anything, he seemed to be gathering confidence as he went along. "He's doing well," she whispered to Lavender. "He'll be sick soon," Lavender whispered back. "It's going to be horrid." What do you think horrid means? When Bruce Bogtrotter had eaten his way through half of the entire enormous cake, he paused for just a couple of seconds and took several deep breaths. The trunch bowl stood with hands on hips, glaring at him. "Get on with it," she shouted. "Eat it up." Suddenly, the boy let out a gigantic belch. Oh my gosh, he burped, which rolled around the assembly hall like thunder. Many of the audience began to giggle. "Silence!" shouted the trunch bowl. The boy cut himself another thick slice and started eating it fast. There were still no signs of flagging or giving up. He certainly did not look as though he was about to stop and cry out, I can't eat anymore. I'm going to be sick." He was still in there running. And now a subtle change was coming over the 250 children watching in the audience. Earlier on, they had sensed impending disaster. They had prepared themselves for an unpleasant scene in which the wretched boy, stuffed to the gills with chocolate cake, would have to surrender and beg for mercy, and then they would have watched the triumphant Trunchbull forcing more and still more cake into the mouth of the gasping boy. Not a bit of it. Bruce Bogtrotter was 3/4 of the way through and still going strong. One sensed that he was almost beginning to enjoy himself. He had a mountain to climb, and he was jolly well going to reach the top or die in an attempt. What is more, he had now become very conscious of his audience and of how they were all silently rooting for him. This was nothing less than a battle between him and the mighty Trunchbull. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Come on, Brucey, you can make it!" The Trunchbull wheeled around and yelled, "Silence!" The audience watched intently. They were thoroughly caught up in the contest. They were longing to start cheering, but they didn't dare. "I think he's going to make it," Matilda whispered. "I think so too," Lavender whispered back. "I wouldn't have believed anyone in the world could eat the whole of that cake, whole of a cake that size." "The Trunchbull doesn't believe it either," Matilda whispered. "Look at her. She's turning redder and redder. She's going to kill him if he wins." The boy was slowly down now. There was no doubt about that, but he kept pushing the stuff into his mouth with the dogged perseverance of a long-distance runner who had sighted the finish line and knows he must keep going. As the very last mouthful disappeared, a tremendous cheer rose up from the audience, and children were leaping on to their chairs, yelling and clapping and shouting, "Well done, Brucey! Good for you, Brucey! You've won a gold medal, Brucey!" The Trunchbull stood motionless on the platform. Her great horsey face had turned the color of molten lava, and her eyes were glittering with fury. She glared at Bruce Bogtrotter, who was sitting on his chair like some huge overstuffed grub, comatose, unable to move or speak. A fine sweat was beading on his forehead, but there was a grin of triumph on his face. Suddenly, the Trunchbull lunged forward and grabbed the large empty china plate on which the cake had rested. She raised it high in the air and brought it down with a crash right on the top of the wretched Bruce Bogtrotter's head, and pieces flew all over the platform. The boy was by now so full of cake, he was like a sack full of wet cement, and you couldn't have hurt him with a sledgehammer. He simply shook his head a few times and went on grinning. "Go to blazes!" screamed the Trunchbull, and she marched off the platform, followed closely by the cook. We are going to stop right there. Happy Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Do something fun. Fill some buckets. Make some goals.